If you have ever felt that prickly sensation on the back of your neck, the sudden unshakable feeling that eyes are burning into your back, or the sinking dread in your stomach when you realize your sanctuary has been violated, then you are exactly where you need to be. Today, we are diving deep into 3 harrowing tales of violation, betrayal, and the kind of paranoia that clings to you long after the lights go out. These aren't just jump scares. They are stories about the people we trust, the places we call home, and the terrifying realization that sometimes the danger is standing right next to you. If you have ever craved justice for someone who violated your privacy, or if you believe that karma should strike hard and fast, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn off the lights. We are going in. We are starting with a story that takes us back to the quiet, deceptive halls of academia, a place where you are supposed to be safe to learn, to grow, and to maybe fall in love. But for one student, the university became a hunting ground. Our narrator was an English major, a serious student with her eyes set on law school, a woman who prided herself on keeping her head down and getting the work done. She was a sophomore in a sorority Kappa, and she was enrolled in an upper-level course on English romanticism. The class was small, intimate, and mostly dead silent, dominated by a teaching assistant named Roar. Roar was an oddball, a lanky guy in his late 20s who gave off the energy of a failed musician, the kind of guy who tried too hard to be cool but just came off as unsettling. He hated the silence of the seminar, and he would passive-aggressively chirp at students who didn't do the reading, creating an atmosphere of thick, awkward tension. The only person who could cut through that tension was Luke. Luke was tall, handsome, a frat guy from a top house who actually did the reading and had a quick, charming wit. He wasn't the class clown. He was just charismatic, the kind of guy who could make a joke about Wordsworth that actually landed. Our narrator found herself drawn to him, mostly because they were the only 2 carrying the class. They formed a silent alliance, the only 2 participating while the rest of the room zoned out. Roar seemed to appreciate this at first. He validated her contributions, wrote long, detailed comments on her essays about Tintern Abbey, and made her feel seen in a room full of zombies. But validation curdled into obsession. Roar started lingering on her, holding eye contact for seconds too long, asking questions that felt less about poetry and more about her personal life. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she was imagining it, but the air between them grew heavy with his unspoken attention. Around this time, she and Luke started running in the same circles. Greek life overlap meant they were at the same parties, the same mixes, the same late-night pizza runs. It was easy. It was uncomplicated. They went on a few dates, started sleeping together, and it felt good, normal, safe. But safety is often just an illusion. One afternoon, walking to her car, she saw Luke smoking a cigarette outside the lecture hall with Roar. They weren't talking like student and teacher. They were talking like co-conspirators. She didn't even know Luke smoked. When she asked him about it later, he laughed it off, saying he was just kissing up to the TA to secure a good grade at the end of the semester. She called him pathetic. He called it smart. She laughed, but the seed of doubt was planted. It wasn't until a few weeks later, lying in bed next to Luke while he slept, that the illusion shattered. His phone buzzed. A YouTube video was playing. Curiosity, that fatal flaw, got the better of her. She was a college girl in the modern world. Trust issues came with the territory. She decided to look. What she found made her blood run cold. Hidden in his gallery were photos of her, dozens of them. Some were innocent, her studying, walking to class, but others were intimate, suggestive, and invasive. The photos she had sent him, yes, but also photos she had never taken. Pictures captured from a distance, moments she didn't know were being preserved. She felt violated, a wave of nausea rolling over her. She didn't wake him up. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the betrayal, but she couldn't let it go. A week later, while he slept again, she guessed his password. It was his birthday, reversed, childish, easy. She dove into his messages, his deleted files, and she found the smoking gun. He hadn't just been hoarding these photos for himself. He was sending them to an unsaved number. He had been selling her to someone. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She started shaking, tears streaming down her face as she scrolled through the evidence of her commodification. She slapped him awake, demanding answers. He stumbled bleary-eyed and panicked, spinning a ridiculous lie about a backup phone, about cloud storage, about anything but the truth. But she knew. She didn't wait for him to finish. She grabbed her things, took photos of the evidence, and ran out into the night, a psychological wreck. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The unknown number belonged to Raw. The police peeled back the layers of this sick operation, and Luke folded like a house of cards. He confessed. Raw had been paying him hundreds of dollars, cold hard cash, in exchange for intimate photos of her. It had been going on since the beginning of the semester. While she was writing essays about memory and nature, her TA was paying her boyfriend to turn her into a product. Luke was expelled. Raw was fired. Jail time was involved, though to her, it never felt like enough. You can put a price tag on a grade, but you can't put a price tag on dignity. That was a year and a half ago. She is a senior now, trying to move on, trying to rebuild the sense of safety that was stolen from her. But the story doesn't end there. Justice in the legal sense was served, but peace is harder to come by. A few weeks ago, she noticed a silver sedan parked outside her sorority house late at night. Not every night, but often enough to notice. It sits there, engine off, shadows pooling around it. She never sees anyone get in or out. She doesn't know if it's Luke, or Raw, or just a random car, but the paranoia is back gnawing at her. She moved into the house well after the incident, so how would they know where she lives? She tells herself she's being paranoid, but when you've been sold by the person you trusted, paranoia is just a survival instinct. She is watching her back, waiting for the other shoe to drop, hoping against hope that the car is just a coincidence, but knowing deep down that some marks never truly fade. But sometimes, the danger isn't someone you know. Sometimes, it's the stranger in the dark, the shadow that moves when you aren't looking. This brings us to Mike, known as Mikey to his friends, a 22-year-old living in the remote snowy forests of Northern California. Mikey lives in a part of the state that tourists don't see. No beaches, no palm trees, just endless trees and snow that buries everything. His nearest neighbor is a 10-minute drive away. It is the kind of isolation that usually feels peaceful, but 2 weekends ago, it turned into a trap. His parents flew out of the country for a wedding in Portugal, leaving Mikey alone in the single-story 3-bedroom house. He was looking forward to the solitude, a weekend of video games and sleep. But the silence of the forest has a way of playing tricks on you. The first night was uneventful. He went to bed around 2 in the morning and fell into a deep sleep. The second night, the nightmare began. He woke up in the pitch black, not sure what time it was, but certain that something had disturbed him. His phone was on airplane mode, so it wasn't a notification. It was just a feeling, a prickle on the back of his neck. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, scanning the familiar shapes of his room, he saw it. His closet door was wide open. Now Mikey is a creature of habit. He always keeps that door closed. It's a sliding door that doesn't catch unless you push it. He knows he closed it. He stared at the open maw of the closet, his brain trying to rationalize it away. Maybe he forgot. Maybe the house settling shifted it. But the fear was rising in his chest, hot and suffocating. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling, and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the edge of his bed, and he screamed. There were 2 figures standing right there, just inches from his mattress. They were standing over him while he slept, silent and still. The light hit them, and they scattered. They moved with a terrifying, practiced speed, bolting in opposite directions to avoid the beam. It was almost choreographed. Mikey started flailing, screaming in pure panic, trying to keep the light on them, but they were too fast. He heard something clatter to the floor, a metallic sound, and then the pounding of footsteps as they sprinted. Down the hallway, adrenaline took over. Mikey jumped out of bed and chased them, but by the time he reached the hallway, the front door was slamming shut. He ran to the living room, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, but they were gone, vanished into the night. He stood there, shaking, alone in the silence, before running back to his room and locking the door. He called 911, his voice cracking as he explained the impossible. While he waited for the police, huddled in the safety of his locked room, he looked at the floor where the figures had been standing. He saw what had clattered. It was one of his mother's kitchen knives, a large, sharp kitchen knife. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. They hadn't been there to rob the TV. They had been standing over his sleeping body with a knife. If he hadn't woken up, if he hadn't turned on that light, he wouldn't be telling this story. He would be another unsolved tragedy in the snow. The police arrived 20 minutes later, scanning the property with flashlights that cut through the trees, but there was no trace, no footprints in the snow, no forced entry. Every door and window was locked, except a front door. The officer looked at Mikey with a mix of pity and skepticism, suggesting he must have forgotten to lock up. Mikey knew he had locked it. He always locks it. But arguing with the police was useless. His parents came home the next day to find their son shattered, and instead of comfort they scolded him for being careless, reinforcing the gaslighting that he was somehow to blame for two people standing over his bed with a weapon. It has been 2 weeks, and Mikey has no answers. He knows that thieves don't break into houses in the middle of nowhere just to stand over a sleeping guy with a knife. They were there for something else, something darker. And now, every time he closes his eyes, he sees those figures, waiting in the dark. But what if the danger isn't in the dark of your bedroom, but in the light of day? What if you see it, over and over again, in the most mundane places, until you realize you are being hunted? This is Natasha's story. Natasha is 23, fresh out of a breakup with a guy named Bennett, and living in her first solo apartment in Columbus, Ohio. It was a one-bedroom on the second floor, facing a parking lot and some trees. It wasn't scenic, but it was hers. She worked remotely, craved privacy, and thought she had found it. For the first few weeks it was perfect. Then, she noticed him. He was a nondescript white guy, maybe late 30s, average build, usually wearing a gray hoodie. The first time was on the stairs at awkward pass-by where he squeezed past her without a word. The second time, he was standing near the dumpsters, just watching. The third time, he was sitting in a navy blue sedan in the parking lot, looking up at her window. She told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe he lived there. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But the sightings kept coming. He was always positioned where he could see her. He was at the stairs, by the mailboxes, in the lot. He never approached her, never spoke, but his presence was becoming a constant low-frequency hum of dread in her life. The paranoia began to bleed into her routine. She went to the gym, then to Chipotle, a 15-minute drive away, in a completely different part of town. She was sitting alone, scrolling on her phone, when she looked up and felt the sickness hit her stomach like a brick. There he was, the gray hoodie, the average build, sitting at a table across the restaurant, eating a burrito bowl. He wasn't looking at her directly, but he was glancing. Look down, look up, look down. It was a subtle, predatory rhythm. Natasha felt trapped. This wasn't her apartment complex. This wasn't a coincidence. Chipotle isn't a place you just end up. You go there. And he was there. She gathered her things, walked fast to her car, locked the doors, and drove home, checking her mirrors every 5 seconds. She didn't see him, but that didn't matter. He knew where she was. The next morning, the navy blue sedan was back in her apartment parking lot. She called the police, feeling foolish as she explained that there was a man who made her uncomfortable. The officer was polite but dismissive, telling her to document things but admitting there was little they could do unless he committed a crime. By the time patrol car arrived 45 minutes later, the sedan was gone. Natasha tried to convince herself she had overreacted, that maybe she was just a traumatized girl seeing monsters everywhere. But then, she found the note. It had been slipped under her door during the night. She woke up, stepped out of her bedroom and saw a piece of paper on the floor. She picked it up, her hands trembling, and read the handwritten message. You should really close your blinds at night. The terror was absolute. It wasn't just a sighting anymore. It was communication. He was close enough to slip a note under her door. He was watching her at night. She didn't wait for her lease to end. She paid the penalty, packed her bags and moved back in with her parents, trading her independence for safety. She thought that was the end of it. She thought distance would protect her, but you can't run from a shadow. About a month later, she was driving back from a gym near her parents' house, miles away from her old apartment, when she saw it, a navy blue sedan, parked on a random side street, 2 blocks from her parents' neighborhood. She knew it was him. She knew it in her gut. She sped the rest of the way home, fighting back tears. She told her dad, who started checking locks and talking about cameras. But the damage is done. It has been 2 weeks since she saw the car, and she is terrified to leave the house. The rational part of her brain hopes it's a coincidence, just a similar car in a world full of similar cars. But the primal part of her brain knows the truth. She has a stalker, and he has tracked her down. She isn't safe in her apartment, she isn't safe in her parents' neighborhood, and she is running out of places to hide. These 3 stories share a common thread that is terrifyingly simple. The belief that we are the masters of our own destiny, that our walls protect us and our friends love us, is a fragile illusion. Whether it's a boyfriend selling your intimacy to a teacher, strangers standing over you with a knife in the dead of night, or a ghost in a gray hoodie leaving notes on your floor. The message is clear. You are never truly alone. If these stories gave you chills, if you found yourself checking the lock on your door or looking over your shoulder, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what is the most satisfying revenge you have ever witnessed. And of course, subscribe for more stories that remind you to always watch your back. Stay safe.